Across the globe, justice systems are being reimagined through trauma-informed care, desistance theory, and neuroscience. At the forefront of this movement stands a voice for change, a trainer of professionals, and a storyteller committed to evidence-based reform. This is The Criminologist, the podcast exploring the people, the practices, and the possibilities shaping a more humane justice system. And now, please welcome the host of The Criminologist, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 239 of The Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. I have just returned from delivering a keynote in Illinois for IPCSA, the Illinois Probation and Court Services Association. And I want to build on an idea I've been developing in my work. Something that I believe fundamentally changes how we understand behavior change. I keep coming back to this question. What if the people we supervise don't have one fixed future or one fixed identity? What if they're not one version of themselves, but multiple versions existing at the same time? And more importantly, what if our role in supervision is helping shape which one becomes real? That's the real heart of what I've been calling quantum desistance. Not physics, but a lens for understanding how change actually unfolds over time. In simple terms, people don't change because of one intervention. They change because one version of themselves gets reinforced, repeated, and eventually becomes the one that holds. And as you're listening, I want you to have someone in mind. Let's call him Marcus. Mid-20s, history of substance use, strong peer influences, inconsistent structure in life, in and out of compliance. You've worked with Marcus. Maybe you're working with him right now. And as you're thinking about Marcus, start to think about his week. Not just his risk level, but where things start to break down. Because that's where change actually begins. And just for a moment, I also want you to hold someone else in mind. Yourself. Because the same process we're about to talk through, it doesn't just apply to the people we supervise. It's the same process that shapes us. Over time, through repeated patterns, certain ways of thinking and acting become more consistent until they start to feel like who we are. And one quick thing before we go further. Everything I'm talking about here, this isn't new science. This builds on what we already know from desistance research, behavioral science, and effective supervision practices, and extends the Risk-Need-Responsivity model by helping us understand how change actually holds over time. What I'm trying to do is organize it in a way that makes it more usable in real-world conversations. Now, for decades, we've been trained in a very specific way. We assess risk, we target criminogenic needs, we focus on behavior, and we measure compliance. And let me be clear, that work matters. It's evidence-based, it's foundational. But if you've been doing this long enough, you've probably felt this too. Sometimes behavior changes, but it doesn't stick. Sometimes compliance is there, but something underneath hasn't shifted. And that's not a failure of risk-needs-responsivity. It's a signal that something deeper is in play. And as we know from Bonta and Andrews, all behavior is learned behavior, including criminal behavior. And it's shaped by perceived reward versus cost. So when we build a case plan for someone like Marcus, we identify criminogenic needs, substance misuse, antisocial peers, lack of structure around those leisure and recreational activities. We try to shift those variables. That's the playbook. And again, it works. But if you step back and look at it, R&R is incredibly effective at identifying risk and targeting behavior. What it doesn't always show us clearly is how change actually stabilizes over time. And if you think about your own life, your behavior didn't shift all at once either. There were stretches of time when things were inconsistent, where different versions of you showed up depending on the situation. Now that's where desistance theory comes in. People don't just stop offending because of external changes. They stop when their identity begins to change, when they no longer see themselves as that person. And what desistance research consistently shows us is this. People sustain change when they begin to see themselves differently. Not just behave differently, but identify differently. Now think about Marcus again. There's the version of him who shows up to your office, talking about getting his life together. There's the version of him on Friday night, back with the same old peers. And there's another version, the one he's not sure he believes in yet. And this shows up across multiple lines of research. Paternoster and Bushway describe this as the movement between a feared self and a possible or preferred self. Schradmuna's work shows that people sustain change when they build a new narrative about who they are. Peggy Giordano talks about cognitive transformation, that moment when someone becomes open to a different version of themselves. Different language, same underlying process. Identity is what makes change stick. And if you're honest, you've lived this too. Think about a version of yourself you've outgrown. There was a time when your current identity didn't exist yet. Maybe as a student, then stepping into your role as a probation officer, becoming a partner, maybe becoming a parent. And as those identities shifted, your behavior followed. Different expectations, different routines, different decisions. And that identity shift doesn't happen in one moment. It happens through small actions, repeated over time, until something starts to feel consistent. So now we have a better question. How does identity actually change? This is where I started looking outside of our field, and I came across some ideas from quantum theory, not as physics, but as a way of thinking. So let me keep this simple. There's this idea in quantum physics of superposition, multiple outcomes existing at the same time until something begins to shape what becomes more likely. Now, the something in question is observation or measurement, which I'll get to in a bit. But think about this in human terms. The people that we supervise are not one fixed identity. They are carrying multiple possible selves. Who they are right now, who they're trying not to become, and who they're trying to be moving forward. And supervision is not about forcing change. It's about shaping probability. And if you think about Marcus, there's the version of him sitting in your office, engaged, future-focused. And there's the version of him later in the week. Different environment, different outcomes. Both are real. The question is, which one is becoming more likely over time? We already do this, whether we realize it or not. Every time we reinforce something, every time we challenge something, every time we follow up or don't, we are making certain behaviors more likely and others less likely. That's not theory, that's everyday practice. And this is not a rejection of R&R. It's an extension of it. R&R helps us identify what to target. This new lens helps us understand how change actually stabilizes. So another way to think about this is we're not just managing risk. We're influencing probability. And if this sounds abstract, it actually lines up with what we already know. And although the language may feel new, the process isn't. From Skinner, we know behavior is shaped by reinforcement. From Al Bandura, we know behavior is learned through observation and environment. And from Sampson and Loeb, we know that life circumstances and social bonds shape trajectories over time. So when we talk about probability, we're just describing that same process differently. What we pay attention to, what we reinforce, what we respond to, influences which version of that person shows up more often. Not instantly, but over time. And if you think about how this plays out in our day-to-day work, we spend a lot of time responding to violations and infractions. Missed appointments, positive drug test, new violations of the law. That's the job. That's part of our compliance role. But I think about what that means from a reinforcement standpoint. It's most of our attention, most of our follow-up, most of our structured response. They're all tied to when something goes wrong. And that's where the weight of the interaction lives. And on the other side, when things go right, when someone shows up, when they avoid a risky situation, when they make a better decision in a tough moment, those moments often pass with very little attention. Not because we don't care, but because the system is designed to catch problems, not always capture progress. And so over time, we can unintentionally reinforce the version of the person that struggles, the person that violates, simply because that's where most of our interaction is focused. And this isn't about ignoring violations. It's about recognizing that every interaction is doing something. Every response is shaping probability. So the question becomes, where's the balance? How often are we intentionally reinforcing the version of the person we want to see more of? Because what we pay attention to, what we reinforce, that's what grows. And when those patterns repeat, they don't just influence behavior. They begin to shape how the brain itself operates. As Hebb's law described early on, cells that fire together wire together. And later work in neuroplasticity shows that repeated behavior literally reshapes neural pathways, which means the patterns we reinforce don't just influence behavior in the moment. They build the foundation for future behavior. And more recent work on habit formation from Lally and Wood show that repeated actions in stable contexts become automatic over time. That's what we're building toward. So when you bring this all together, you get this. People don't have one fixed future. They carry multiple possible versions of themselves at the same time. And our role is not just to manage risk. It's to shape the conditions that make one version more likely than another. That's the shift. We move from a focus on risk to a closer look at probability. We look from examining behavior and looking at the role of identity, from one of compliance to that of coherence, and finally, from one of intervention to one of true interaction. Now, those shifts are subtle but important. We move from thinking about risk as something fixed to understanding behavior as something that becomes more or less likely based on what's happening in a person's actual life. Take a second and think about somebody in your caseload right now. Not their risk score, not the severity of their offense, but their actual work week, if you will. What does it break down to? Because that's where the work is. That person you just thought of, that's your Marcus. And to do so, I want to introduce you to a tool I've been developing, something designed to take what we know from desistance research and translate it into something you can actually use in one of your sessions. Now, this tool builds directly on the work of Paternoster and Bushway, their 2009 article entitled Desistance and the Feared Self, Toward an Identity Theory of Criminal Desistance. And at its core, it's about helping someone see the different versions of themselves that they already are. I call it Shift the Weak, Shift the Self. And the idea is simple. We're not going to change the whole person at once. We're focusing on the structure of their week, because that's where behavior actually happens and where identity starts to take shape. I'm going to walk you through exactly what this looks like in a real conversation with someone like Marcus. First of all, set the tone. Use language with your clients along the lines of, all right, we're going to try something a little different today. This isn't about catching you doing something wrong. It's about figuring out how your week actually works. Now, listeners, there's 5 easy steps to this tool, and step 1 is entitled Map the Week. When you talk about this with your client, this might sound something like, okay, Marcus, walk me through a typical week. When are things most likely to go sideways? Who or where tends to get you in trouble? And what keeps happening over and over? Now, listener, write this down as they talk, and you might conclude this first step saying something along the lines of, all right, good. This is about patterns, not judgment. Now, step 2 of 5 is entitled, Introduce the 3 Selves. And again, here's some language you might use on your client. Marcus, I'm going to use 3 simple labels, and you tell me which one fits best right now. The working version of you, what you usually do, the version you don't want to become if this keeps going on, and the version you're trying to move toward. Which one is showing up most in your week right now? Listener, step 3 is entitled, Define Them Together. Now let's put some words to this, Marcus. Working version looks like, if nothing changes, where does that lead? And what would a better version of you look like, realistically? Listener, keep this concrete. We're looking for things along the lines of their job, their routine, their relationships and not merely vague traits. Now, step 4 is entitled Pick Small Changes. And that might sound something a little bit like this. Marcus, we're not trying to fix everything just this week. Looking at what we wrote down, what's 1 or 2 small things we could change? Maybe a different place, maybe different people. Perhaps we focus on certain times of the day. And what's one positive thing that we could add? Let's pick 1 or 2 things you can actually do this week. And then, listener, you want to write these down clearly as they tell you them. And that brings us to step 5, which is entitled Tie It to the Preferred Self. Could sound something like this. Marcus, if you followed through on those this week, how would that look different? What would that better version of you be doing differently? And listener, actually have the client say this out loud. And then you can close it with something along these lines. All right, Marcus, that's the plan for this week. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for effort and anything that moves you in that direction. When we meet next time, we'll look at what worked, what didn't, and we'll adjust. The key here, listener, is to stay curious and not corrective. Keep it specific and not behavioral. Reinforce any effort, not just successes. And don't argue with their answers. Use them. Because now you're reinforcing identity, not just behavior. And this is exactly what the research tells us. Change happens through small actions, repeated over time until they become stable. Not one big moment, consistency. Or, to borrow a page from Quantum, coherence. And if you are familiar with the TIDES supervision model created with my colleague Nicole Kimberly Staley, you will recognize that this is the identity pillar in motion. We're not telling someone who to become. We're helping them experience a different version of themselves repeatedly until it begins to feel real. This is co-creation, meeting the person where they are. This is why identity work matters so much, because behavior follows identity when it's reinforced consistently. And as Fergus McNeil's work reminds us, this process is deeply relational. Change is shaped not just by what we do, but by how we show up in that interaction. So I'll leave you with this. If people don't have one fixed future, one fixed identity, then our role is bigger than we think. We're not just managing behavior. We're not just reducing risk. We're helping shape which future becomes real. One interaction at a time, 1 week at a time. If you want to learn more about the TIDES supervision model and how these concepts translate into structured practice, you can visit our website at thetidesllc.com. Again, that website is thetidesllc.com. If you have questions specifically about the Shift the Week, Shift the Self tool, feel free to reach out to me directly at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Or feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn if we're connected. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, theparagongroup.llc.com, for training or presentations as to evidence practice, implementation, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact me at the aforementioned email of The Criminologist Podcast. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added to those feeds all the time. You don't want to miss out. And lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast, and of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
Tired of those pesky risk factors? Fed up with those nagging periods of reoffending? Just can't seem to keep on the straight and narrow? Then try Criminogard. Criminogard is our patented repellent against criminogenic need. Criminogard is effective against the risk factors of delinquent past, dysfunctional family relationships, substance misuse, lack of pro-social leisure activities, deficits around education and employment, negative peers, pro-criminal attitude, and a history of antisocial personality pattern. Simply apply Criminogard at the onset of delinquent behavior or when actuarial risk assessment warrants application. Criminogard works by attacking criminogenic need at the source while buffering against future risk. Inspired by general personality and cognitive social learning theory, Criminogard identifies criminogenic need at its source. Then our top secret byproducts mimic pro-social modeling to elicit the onset of pro-social behavior. Once the cost for antisocial behavior outweighs the rewards, users begin seeing reductions in criminal deeds. Criminogard is available in regular, mint, or jasmine scent. Find Criminogard at all quality vendors, shops, and strip malls. Criminogard is not a substitute for proven evidence-based practices. Criminogard may cause mild discomfort or skin rash. In case of continued maladaptive behavior, users should subject themselves to proven core correctional practices. Criminogard has failed to result in significant effect sizes in recidivism reduction. Buyer beware, not sold in Canada.
The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, training opportunities, program design, or interview requests, visit theparagongroup.llc.com. To learn more about the TIDES supervision model, a trauma-informed, desistance-based approach to community supervision, please visit the TIDESLLC.com. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to check out the Criminologist YouTube channel for additional content, including exclusive video interviews and international insights. Both the Criminologist Podcast and the Criminologist channel are brought to you by the Criminologist Media Group. Don't forget to give the show a 5-star review. And as always, thank you for listening.